Hello, I'm Nick Hobden, partner at Thompson and Passmore, head of the employment team here, and I'm joined today by Ashley Matthews, a senior associate in our team. And today we're giving a quick overview of remedies available in the Employment Tribunal, which is something that both employers and employees often want to understand early on. For employees, whether they're going to make a claim against their employer for a remedy, what they're looking to get, or for the employer, what are they looking at potentially as a risk if their employee does take them to the Employment Tribunal. So actually the first question I want to ask is, if someone wins their case in the Employment Tribunal, what kind of remedies can they expect?
Well, that would really depend on what type of claim they brought. The tribunal can award compensation, so that's both financial loss and in some cases compensation for the emotional impact of the treatment. They can also make declarations to confirm the breach that has occurred, and also make recommendations. So this is more in discrimination cases where they will make recommendations to the employer of steps to be taken to reduce the impact of the discriminatory treatment on the individual, for example, reviewing policies or certain training.
So let's start with unfair dismissal, Ashley. What compensation is available there?
So there are kind of two main parts to it. We've got the basic award, which is calculated in very much the same way as a statutory redundancy payment. So we've got the length of service, age, and a capped weekly amount, which I think is around £719 at the moment, but increases each year. We've then got the compensatory award, which is very much based on the compensation for the financial loss arising from the dismissal itself. So that's the loss of earnings, both past and potentially future loss of earnings if they're still unemployed, pension loss, loss of benefits, things like that. There is a statutory cap on that award as well, which again changes each year. I think now it's around 118,000 or 52 weeks gross pay, depending on which is lower. The tribunal can also reduce the amount of compensation. So, for example, if the claimant failed to take reasonable steps to mitigate their loss, or if there was some sort of blameworthy conduct where they've contributed to the dismissal, known as contributory fault, or to reflect the probability that were it not for the procedural failures, they probably would have been fairly dismissed anyway, which is known as the Polkey deduction. For unfair dismissal, the tribunal can also order that the claimant is actually reinstated or re-engaged. But in practice, this happens in very, very few cases, I think less than 1%.
Ashley, what about discrimination claims? What's involved in compensation there?
So slightly different awards. It's actually the compensation, unlike in unfair dismissal, is actually uncapped. So like an unfair dismissal, you do have the financial losses, but in addition to that, you also have injury to feelings. So that would be to compensate on for the emotional impact of the unlawful treatment. And also potentially personal injury if the discrimination has resulted in a psychological or physical injury to the claimant. In addition, as kind of touched upon earlier, the tribunal can also make recommendations and declarations.
Thank you. Ashley, how does an employment tribunal assess injury to feelings in money terms?
So the key case here is Vento and Chief Constable of West Yorkshire Police, where the Court of Appeal set out 3 bands for injury to feeling awards. So these bands have been updated over time for inflation, but they're currently the lower band, which is 1,200 to 12,100, and that's for less serious cases, for example, one-off incidents. We then have the middle band, which kind of goes up to 36,400, and those are for cases more serious than the lower band, but not quite so severe to get into that upper band. And the upper band is up to 60,700, and that's for really the most serious, distressing sorts of cases. So when deciding which band applies, the tribunal looks at the impact on the individual, including factors like the claimant's vulnerability, the severity of the distress caused, the position of the perpetrator, and also how serious that treatment actually was.
So actually, we've talked about unfair dismissal compensation, we've talked about uncapped discrimination compensation, including injured feelings, and you've talked about the Vento bands. What other uplifts are available which the Employment Tribunal can deploy to compensate an individual?
Yeah, so I mean, an important one, if either party, the claimant or the respondent, unreasonably fails to comply with the ACAS Code of Conduct on disciplinary and grievance procedures, then the tribunal can actually reduce or increase compensation by up to 25%. And there are also other types of uplifts that the tribunal can award. For example, if an employer fails to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, or if they fail to comply with the code, the fire and rehire code, for both of those, they could increase the compensation up to 25%.
So Ashley, can you tell me, are the tribunal awards, do they tend to be quite high in this country?
So, not usually. Despite some high-profile headlines, most awards are relatively modest. So according to the latest tribunal statistics, the median award for unfair dismissal was something like 6,700. And for discrimination, median awards typically range from 8,500 to 17,000, depending on the protected characteristic. Now, of course, there are some exceptions. In the last tribunal statistics, sexual orientation and age discrimination, we saw a much higher median awards than that. And of course, where the conduct ends the claimant's career or has a real lasting impact on their life, we can see, much more significant awards. But I think generally they're much more modest than most people would expect.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, as you've seen, the remedies in the Employment Tribunal can vary significantly depending on the type of claim, financial losses involved, and the wider impact on an employee claimant. Whilst there are some high-value awards, they are the exception rather than the rule, and most claims result in modest compensation, and many of them get resolved through negotiated settlement before reaching an Employment Tribunal claim or indeed a final hearing. Where we come in, whether we're acting for employees, is to advise employees on what they can realistically expect to recover from their employer in the Employment Tribunal, depending on the claims they make and the circumstances and the evidence. And we quite often talk about negotiation strategy with them to see whether we can find them a settlement. For employers, we support them through really assessing what the chances are of a successful defence of an Employment Tribunal claim, and if they have committed discrimination or unfair dismissal, then what realistically they may be expected to have to pay if an Employment Tribunal hears the case and makes an award. And that can often then set the opportunity up for perhaps a negotiated settlement offering the employee some money And very often it's couched in terms of, well, this employee may not have remained in that employment for long, and that the employment claim is based on a claim for unfair process rather than actually the decision to dismiss. So all of that can be put into the mix. But above all, we're here to advise employers and employees should any employment tribunal claims be contemplated, threatened, or even get off the ground. That's what we're here for, and we're very happy to help. Thank you.